Welcome, Nora, to our Abilities virtual experience. We welcome you and the Autism Self-Advocacy Network. And Nora, can you tell us about the Autism Self-Advocacy Network?
So ASAN is a policy organization and nonprofit by and for the autistic community. Our job is to work in the policy field to advance the rights of all autistic people and disabled people more broadly. And to that end, we also make resources talking about policy issues, current events, and how to take action on those things in plain language and easy read.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. In our community, we often hear the phrase "nothing about us without us" as a way of encouraging the inclusion of people with disabilities. How does ASAN uphold that?
So ASAN upholds that by centering and platforming autistic voices in the fight to kind of make sure that resources and policies put in place to help our community are actually doing that. And that when they are, that they're listening to us about what is there and what's good and also what's missing. Our staff is entirely autistic people, and we make it a point to try and learn from all kinds of autistic people. That means autistic people of color, autistic non-speaking people, autistic people of marginalized genders. We are always learning. We're not perfect by any means, but we very strongly believe that when we say we need to fight for all autistic people, that means all autistic people. And that includes how we choose to make resources, how we fight for policy and host events in public and behind the scenes. It's always our job to keep listening and keep learning. It's never going to be the exact right thing for everyone, but we can always do better. And we always need to be working to progressively include more people every single time.
Awesome. And let's say we wanted to get involved with ASAN. How can people get involved?
So we have a few ways. If people want like a quick reference page for that, we have a tab on our website that says get involved that lists all of this stuff just at a glance. But the one thing I always promote first when people ask how they can help out is that if you're comfortable using a phone, I always ask people to check out our proxy calling system to see if they would be up for volunteering to make calls for people who want to speak with their representatives, but who might not either feel comfortable or maybe physically unable to communicate using the phone. The basic idea there is that when there's an action alert, meaning like ASAN has put out, say, a statement on a current event or a piece of legislation, and we're asking people to take action on it. Basically, volunteers for the proxy calling system take scripts submitted by people who can't call their reps and make those calls on their own schedule. Our call requests do also specify if they're okay for you to call and leave a voicemail rather than speaking to someone directly. So even if you can only call during hours when the elected official's office is closed, you can definitely still help out. Some other ways that people could get involved include reading and sharing our resources, signing up for our newsletter to get action alerts, and participating in our annual programs like Disability Day of Mourning and Autism Acceptance Month.
Awesome. And we hear a lot about self-advocacy. Now, why is that particularly so important?
It's really important because self-advocacy teaches autistic people and honestly people in general that it's our responsibility to fight for ourselves and our communities to have full lives with all the rights that kind of come with being a full and complete human being. So that goes for everything as basic as the right to say no, all the way up to the nuances of making healthcare policy that fully acknowledges the rights of all people with disabilities and making sure that that healthcare policy makes sure that all of our community members receive care. Self-advocacy tells us directly and urgently that our lives are worth living and our lives are worth saving. That means that all means all, and that every person deserves their rights.
Awesome. When we think of self-advocacy and advocacy in general, it kind of feels like it's a 24/7 job. How do you avoid being burnt out when it feels like you always have to be on?
That's a really good question. So when I talk about this, I always say that strategy is key. When I talk about group activism, so like within, say, a student group or within like a group of individual disability activists, I always talk about what I call the tire method. And the way that I think about that is like if you picture a car tire as it's going around and around. So some people at any given point are the part of the tire being crushed against the pavement. Some of them are recovering from having just been crushed, and some of them are preparing to get crushed again. So the key thing to think about there is some people at any moment are doing labor, some are in recovery from that labor, and some are getting ready to enter that labor again. And the key thing when you're looking at that is planning to spread the work out. So it's not just one person or one specific group of people constantly being squished, because that always leads to burnout. And in terms of like recovering from burnout and trying to avoid it on an individual level, it's important to learn what the signs look like for you. So examples of that might be, are you snapping at people more? Are you angry or tired? Are you crying or having meltdowns more often? And when you see those things happening, it's important to plan on taking some time to step back and to manage your time in advance to build in rest, and if and when you do hit burnout, to seek help, especially if you're worried that you might hit a crisis point. So that might look like talking to family or friends, or speaking with a therapist or a community member that's trained in peer-to-peer care. It's also worth noting that for some groups of people, especially multiply marginalized people, there is kind of a tendency to basically live in permanent burnout as a result of structural oppression. So for that reason, the fight to end those forms of oppression has to be with everyone and not just people who are multiply marginalized. By spreading kind of that work to people who have more privilege, that's one way to kind of scale back the amount of labor that multiply marginalized people are doing. And that's a way to kind of keep people at more intersections from like complete lifelong burnout, even if we can't completely take it away in the given moment.
Awesome. Well said. Well said. Now, what are some challenges when it comes to advocating for yourself, and what are some of the ways that we can overcome those type of challenges?
Definitely. So I would say the big thing and like the big challenge, especially for people who have been put through oppression or both, is that there's kind of this inbuilt tendency to just kind of want to shut up and sit down and do what we're told, to just survive and to try and get through the day, even if it hurts us or the people around us. And again, as we've kind of talked about before, burnout is a huge challenge. And when you're fighting constantly for yourself and your community, that is definitely a big part of it. In terms of trying to address or overcome those challenges, practice is key. Mentorship and looking to people who have had to advocate for themselves before is key. Representation in terms of seeing how other people do this is key. And using the resources our community has made about self-advocacy to learn more about it and how to do it on any given issue, but also in general, and to think about how you can apply that in your day-to-day life is helpful. I would say that it doesn't always have to be super complicated. It can be as simple as just saying the word no, saying something like, no, I'm not going to do that specific action. That makes me feel pain, or that makes me feel sad. No, I won't stop, say, moving my hands because it's what lets me focus. Or no, I won't force myself to make eye contact with you because I can either look at you or I can listen to you. I can't do both at the same time. So when we're thinking about that, I would recommend as a place to start looking at some of the toolkits that we have on the ASAN resource library page, because that has kind of ways to break down self-advocacy for specific issues. So for example, how to call your representatives is one of the resources we have. I would also recommend checking out SARTAC, SARTAC, which has a resource center for self-advocates more broadly, both in terms of like how to learn self-advocacy for yourself, but also how to build advocacy groups and how to work on behalf of more people.
Awesome. I love that. And we know in the fights that we have to have allies. You know, one of my favorite movie scenes of all time was Endgame Avengers, when Cap couldn't do it by himself. He had to get the whole team behind him, but the whole team had to know their job. So with that being said, what are some constructive ways that allies can help?
That's a really good question. So I think that when we're talking about the role of allies, I think kind of similar to the role allies have in reducing burnout, I think the whole thing of fixing structural issues needs to fall across like a variety of types of people and not just the people it impacts directly. In terms of ways to work as an ally for autistic people specifically, we actually have a whole chapter just about that in our new version of Welcome to the Autistic Community, which is a resource guide for autistic people, people who think they might be autistic, and allies. It's available entirely for free on autismacceptance.com. And we kind of like break down different ways that you can go through that. In general, I would also recommend thinking through when you're thinking through whether to, say, support a panel or an organization or a study, think through whether autistic people are at the table and in leadership when it comes to who you choose to support in the name of supporting autistic advocacy. So some questions to think about might be, does that panel about how to support autistic people with high support needs have any autistic people with high support needs on it? Were those people a part of constructing that conversation, or were they a part of planning the event? If you're looking at a study, an example question might be, do they do community-based participatory research methods, which basically means, did they talk to the community from the beginning, right? When they were forming their question, when they were starting to think about making a resource, did they ask the community if that was something they wanted or needed? And how did they do that? And CBPR does also stipulate like that you continue checking in with that community throughout the entire process. And if people want like a plain language explanation of that, if you check out the operational resource, or pardon me, if you want like a plain language explanation of that, either Aspire, AASPIRE, or ASAN, both have pages that talk about community-based participatory research and kind of break down what it means. And I would also say that if you're looking at an organization to donate to or to promote and support, think about whether that org has autistic people in leadership, how many of them are there, and are there just one type of autistic person? For example, just autistic white men, or just a single autistic person in general. Just in general, my advice there is to think critically and try to place your support, your energy, and your platform in terms of sharing content to try and make sure that it represents as much of our community as possible and not just a theory of what someone else thinks autistic people are.
Awesome. Well said. And how can people get in touch with ASAN?
Great question. So we are easiest to reach at info@autisticadvocacy.org. You can check out our website at autisticadvocacy.org, and we are also on Twitter, Facebook, and Tumblr, and all of our handles are linked on our website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us here at the Abilities Virtual Experience, and we wish you nothing but success, my friend.
Likewise, thank you so much for having us.